Hello, everybody, and welcome to another in our series of The Secret of My Success. I'm Tom Watt. I'm the co-chair of the PRCA in Scotland. I'm delighted to welcome you either live or whether you're listening on YouTube later on. We in this series speak to some really inspiring communicators, really inspiring communications professionals about their careers, what they've learned, and how we can learn from them. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Lesley Brydon, who's the founder and CEO of Clark Communications. Hello, Lesley.
Hi Tom. Thanks for having
Um,
me.
Not at all. Leslie done every job, I think it sounds like, in the range of a PR agency across her career, and has grown Clark from a kind of solo venture into a thriving business with 20 employees now. So thank you for joining us, and looking forward to hearing some of the secrets that you've got for us. If you have a question for Leslie, please do just drop it in the chat. We'll be picking up on your questions once we've run through a few of mine. But no, do please drop them in the chat. Um, if it isn't too formal and this isn't too much like a job interview, a good place to start is probably like a summary of your CV, Leslie. What has brought you
Okay.
here?
Wow, I haven't done a job interview for a long time. So yeah, I'll try and remember what that was like. But it's over 20 years since I've done a job interview. But yeah, I guess okay. Well, if I start from the very beginning, I sort of with me coming out of education and trying to get into the PR sector. Um, I badgered a lot of agencies. I knew from the out that that's what I wanted to do. That I wanted to go into agency, and unfortunately, I left education in the middle of a recession, and that's the experience for quite a lot of people. Whether it was that recession that was going on in the early 90s or more recent ones, and there have been a few. Yeah, I badgered a lot of agencies and eventually got my first break and got into an account exec job in a tiny agency. There was only two of us, me and the account director, and we were a sort of an attachment to an ad agency. So they put us in a corner and we did the PR stuff, jazz hands included. That kind of kicked me off. It was a company called Covey PR, and my agency career just sort of went from there. I did another four agencies after that. So that was Covey. I then moved on to what was at the time, well, what was FMS, where I worked with Wilma, who of PRCA fame.
Small world.
Wilma interviewed me and brought me into FMS, and I was sort of given an introduction there into financial marketing and financial comms, and that really started the rest of the path for me because that's something, having worked at one consumer agency and then a sort of more financial marketing agency, that really cemented for me that corporate and financial B2B was my thing, and that was the way that I was going to go. Um, and after a couple of years there, I moved on to work for Citygate, which at the time, so the agencies got slightly bigger each time I moved, and ended up working with Citygate, which then became Citygate Smarts and is now Smarts and or different derivations of such. And there I helped them sort of set up their kind of corporate team. They did corporate work anyway, but we established a bit of a corporate team there and worked happily there for a couple of years before moving off and ending up at Weber, where you came along to Weber a few years after me. God, I think if you put a room full of PR people in Scotland and asked everybody to put their hand up if they've worked at Weber or Shandwick at some point in their life, it would be a majority. But yeah, I ended up joining Weber in 2000, and that was me for the next 12 years, and sort of based out of their Edinburgh office. So that was, I suppose that was my big job. It was the biggest agency that I worked for. I joined there, what age was I? I was 26 when I joined Weber. I joined as an account director, and kind of worked my way through through the ranks in Weber, and amassed a lot of experience, not just client experience, but experience in running a business and managing people. All of that sort of fun growing up stuff came to me through Weber. Being on a board, being a part of a management team, and really starting to think of the job more as running a business, alongside doing the technical parts of the job. Um, I left Weber in 2012, which was the second time. So I did 4 agencies, second time in my career that was made redundant. And I think that's important to say, because it's important to let people know that if they are going through that at the moment, and I know a lot of people are. It's been a tough year in the agency sector, that there is life after redundancy, and you do move on. And the way that I decided to move on was to set up on my own. So that's what I did in 2012. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but yeah, it was a no-brainer for me, really. I'm an agency gal, so I'd I'd worked at this sort of top end of Weber, one of the biggest agencies. It was I'm not going to say I was unemployable, but it would have been difficult for me to do anything else, really, unless I wanted to go in house. And I'm not saying I was necessarily set in my ways, but it might have been difficult for me to go into another owner managed agency at that point. So I decided just to do my own thing, and I did that for 2 or 3 years. And then as the clients mounted up and it became clear that I wasn't going to be able to do all that work myself, I then started to think about it as a business, and start to grow it as a business. So we come to today, through lots of fun, lots of ups and downs, 2 acquisitions, which we can probably talk about a little bit more. But we're now 20 people, based across Glasgow and Edinburgh, where we've got graphic design, social, digital, as well as that sort of core PR that the business is built on. But it still reflects probably my background, of that B2B corporate. But obviously, there have been a lot of other great people come along and joined the Clark business who have other talents. So we now do other things, that are probably more B2B adjacent than consumer adjacent, if you like. So more public sector. We have really strong tech credentials. Looking at the kind of the rural sector, the land and estate sector, those sorts of things. So, if you're a crisp manufacturer, you're probably not going to come to us. But if you're an entrepreneurial business, then you're more likely to.
Yeah, a very
Phew,
broad
can I take a
brush.
breath?
Take a breath. Yeah, no, that's an excellent start to the job interview. So no, we are absolutely going to pick up on. I'd love to pick your brains on the kind of challenges of setting up your own thing, but we'll go back to some of the things that you said right at the start. You said that you clearly wanted to work in an agency, you clearly wanted to work in PR. Where did that come from? What was the why agency, why PR?
Um, so why PR is probably the easier one. I left school the without really very much direction. I wasn't that sure what I wanted to do, as many people sort of find themselves in that situation. Um, as I didn't have the qualifications to go to university. I wasn't a particularly academic person, but what I was a reader. I loved stories, and I could stick me in a room with a book, and I'm happy, and I still am to this day. And so I would have loved to have gone to uni and done English literature, and and all of that sort of stuff. But I didn't have the qualifications to get me there. So I started looking at going to college, and what might interest me. So it was there wasn't necessarily a burning desire. There was some things that I liked, and I started looking for something that kind of spoke to that. And I didn't know anything about PR, but the sort of more general comms qualification, it was an HND at the time, that sort of popped up as an option that I could do. And when I looked into it, it was a sort of mixed bag of things. I'm pretty sure it probably still is, but it was a bit of advertising, marketing, journalism, PR, and you could either go that way or you could go the other way and do radio and sort of technical, the sort of technical side of things. But I went down that kind of comm side of things, and I think the moment I fell in love with PR, and I still am, um, was really because of a really good lecturer
Mm.
who captured my imagination, who saw that I had, some sort of aptitude for it. And I still remember the project, the sort of assignment that they set us that year, which was you're doing a restaurant launch, and man, I put so much work into it. I designed menus. We put together a whole launch event. I wrote all the press releases, and when I say I designed menus, at that time I didn't even use a computer, so they were all hand drawn. They were beautiful. But just that, telling that entire story of that business through design, through the sort of writing of the content, through putting together an event, through just sort of describing what sort of photography we were going to do, all of that thing. And it just really captured my imagination, which was one that just really enjoyed stories and as it turns out, storytelling. So that was sort of okay, that's what I'm going to do. And thankfully, that lecturer who saw something in me, her husband at the time worked in comms. So when I left college, she set me up with a sort of voluntary job. He worked in the third sector, so with Children First, or the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, as it was at the time, and he was the head of comms there. So she set me up with an unpaid sort of internship with him, and then that exposed me. I think I went to a press conference on my first day. Now, a lot of people coming into comms
Terrifying.
now, will never go to a press conference, but we did them at that time, and it was Children First's response to new legislation on banning smacking of children. So it was meaty, it's a meaty subject, and it was a busy press conference. There was a lot of media there, and that was day one, and I got to see how it all worked. And I spent 9 months with them there, working on everything from sort of some quite meaty comm stuff to sponsorship, and the sort of the profile stuff that the third sector does, and it just everything that I did, everything that was thrown at me, just kind of cemented, on a daily basis, that this is what I really wanted to do. Why agency? I think I wanted the variety. And I think agency is great at that point in a career, because you can try lots of different things. I went into an agency that did a lot of consumer. And there was a little bit of corporate, but I tried. It was mainly drinks brands. I worked on Theakston's beer and some whiskey brands and a wee bit of a sort of smattering of B2B. Some of my first clients were like industrial ovens and whole sausages, and so it gave me a bit of a, okay, well, I quite like doing that. I'm not so keen on that. And it gave me a real bit of variety, but allowed me to then see, okay, this is what I like to do, and then allowed me to move forward in that way. So I think agency was absolutely the right choice for me.
It's fascinating whenever we've done these, how often I loved stories. I love storytelling. I love that, and that was kind of
Mm,
the bit that how often that is a reason for people to get into to comms. It's yeah, and I assume doing every element from designing up to designing the menus set you up nicely for when you were doing your own thing, and flying
yeah,
solo for a few years. That's all hands on deck. Um,
yeah.
so was there any kind of how did you learn the ropes? Was it any kind of particularly influential people early in your career that gave you advice that's kind of stuck with you early on, do's and don'ts that you've absorbed as one of your things now?
Do you know, I think that's interesting, that you use the word absorbed, because I think that's how I learned mainly. I worked with some great people, and every agency that I worked at, there was there was a line manager or a sort of mentor there. I'm looking at you, Wilma. And then, Lesley at Smarts, and then Nora at Weber, who you'll have worked with as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I learned from all of these people. I don't ever really remember any of them sort of taking me aside and instructing me and saying, this is how we do it. I watched them. I was sat in a room with them, and I watched them, and I listened to them, and then I did what they did, because I was working with really good people. So I absorbed sort of different things from different people in my career. There was when I worked at FMS. So what was I doing there? I was an account exec. I shared a room with Wilma, seasoned comms practitioner, and a gentleman called Jim Dow, who was a former business journalist, had been a business editor at Scotsman. He knew his stuff inside out and back to front, and the three of us sat in a room together. At the time, I shouldn't really say this, but at the time at that time you could smoke in offices, and everybody was a smoker. So it was a sort of smoke-filled room of comms people, on the phone a lot, and me just listening to what people were doing, and how Wilma was dealing with journalists, and what questions Jim was asking clients, and how he was extracting the stories that we needed from clients, and how they were putting together strategy, or how they were advising clients in a crisis, or in particular how they were dealing with challenging journalists, or sort of journalists that were really quite difficult to deal with. And and I I, I learned through sort of mimicry, I suppose, just watching what they did, and the same at the other sort of agencies that I went on to, recognizing, I suppose, and okay, I suppose I'll give myself a bit of credit for recognizing what the good stuff was, and and picking that up and replicating it, and then maybe adding a bit of my own whatever to it. But I mean, you said right at the top, yeah, I've done every agency. Yeah, junior account exec, account manager, account director, associate director, director, managing director, blah, blah, blah. Yes. And at all of those times, I was sat in rooms with really great people and I listened to what they were doing.
Hmm. Sort of
And
like
I think
learn
that's
by
so
osmosis.
important and it cannot be underestimated. From an education perspective, yes, I had an HND that I think what that did for me was, there was some terminology that I knew what it meant. I knew what a press release was. I knew what a contact report was. It's very important to know that when I was an account exec. I knew what the kind of principles of it were. But the actual doing and the creativity and everything that came as, absorption from the people around about me.
And was that I mean, some of the things we regularly get asked about, especially people that are earlier in their careers, about how they can get better at new business or cold calling or networking, building a contact book. Was that through absorption from the people that or was that sort of, I know that I need to learn to do this. How did you build those skills?
I mean, building a contact book, and yes, I remember that being really intimidating. Whether that was a contact book of journalists or whether it was a contact book that would sort of serve me later when I came to do more business development. Um, and and yes, okay, yes, this was a piece of advice that was given to me. I thought I had to say particularly and building a contact book of journalists, although this goes for any sort of business. I thought I had to contact or build relationships with chief execs and the editors, and that terrified me. I was last in my early 20s. I had nothing in common with mostly men, and mostly in their kind of 40s or 50s. I'm not going to take them out for a pint. What does that look like? It doesn't work. But the journalists or the people sort of working in businesses that I did make really close contacts with, were people that were operating at my level. And then I kept those contacts, as I went on, and I became more senior, they became more senior as well. So when it came to a point that I needed a really senior journalist, or I needed to get in touch with a CEO or a head of comms, a lot of them were people that I had made contact with in my formative years, and just sort of, kept up those contacts. So I think the main piece of advice would be, network at your own. I don't want to say the word level because I don't mean it in a hierarchical way, but at your own level of comfort,
Hmm.
and keep these people with you, and you will form a network that you will kind of take with you throughout your career. And now, there's obviously there's 20 people working at Clark. We've got a lot of young members of the team. They have a new network that's not my network. They have a network of journalists, of people that work in businesses that I don't know. And I have my network, but when we put it all together, it becomes really strong.
Hmm. Yeah, almost like it will happen by doing the work rather than feeling like you've got to force it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, is there any one part of like of standout work from your agency? But prior, we'll come on to when you're doing your own thing, but when you were working across agencies, is there any one particular piece of standout work that you were like, that was it? That was a moment that I was really proud of what we were doing. This is what you get into communications for.
Yeah.
Or more than one.
Yeah, there's probably more than one. I when I saw this question, I was, oh, right, okay. I mean, yeah, there's various for different reasons. Um, and probably one of the ones that sits near the top, and people that know me will know this one. Is the when I was in the latter stages of my time at Weber, I led the comms for Edinburgh Zoo and the arrival of the pandas in Scotland. And that had and I realize I've totally contradicted myself here. I've said I'm a B2B person, and now I'm saying, yeah, pandas, that you can't get any less B2B. But it had all the hallmarks of a really great fun project. It was interesting. It it involved three different governments, the British government, the Scottish government, the Chinese government. So, it had elements of diplomacy as well as tourism, as well as, the whole conservation side of things. It was a massive logistical job. Not that I flew the plane and brought them over myself, but, there were lots of different elements to it. From a media perspective, it's infrequent in Scotland, I think, to work on a job that has such media interest. And that is when, all the tools that you've got in your toolkit, all of a sudden come out and are brought to bear all at the same time. I think I'm probably fair in saying that the majority of the time when we're doing comms in Scotland, we're trying to attract the media or an audience in a story that, working on a story that sold itself was just fabulous. We did a press conference again. We had to we had to do it twice because the space that we had, wasn't big enough. I think we had about 200 journalists from all over the world to on site and to try and manage. And there were lots of moving parts. Never mind the fact that you're sort of bringing into live animals, into that sort of situation. There were key decisions to be made about how to tier the media, how to manage the interest, how to select which journalists got some of the really prime stories and all that sort of stuff. And it was great fun. It was really challenging, and some of the moving parts were really quite challenging, but it was good fun and it was immersive. I think that was at the time when I worked on that project, it was pretty much the only project that I worked on for 6 months. It was just, it was constant. So that was fun. Something that went over a kind of longer period of time and maybe isn't quite so soft and fluffy was the Edinburgh Tram project. I did sort of led on the comms for that for about 3 years, through public consultation as the tram bill went through Parliament. So the sort of the beginning of that project, I wasn't doing the comms for it when they started digging up the streets, but it was during the time that I was going through Parliament. So again, a huge public consultation, media inquiries, on a daily basis, lots of really complex information, contentious.
Mm.
A really, really quite an interesting project to work on. But and then some of the stuff that came a bit later. It's a project that it's a standout for me, but it's not. I cannot claim any credit for the work. When I set up on my own, and I worked, I was basically working as a sole practitioner. So, I was for hire, and another Scottish agency, Golly Slater, asked me to help them out. Not because they needed bodies, they needed kind of extra people because they were delivering the logistics of all the media, attention and attendance at the main count for the Scottish referendum. So they were coordinating all media attendance, all the media facilities, media from all over the world, again, in a huge hall out in Ingliston, and everything from, obscure international titles to, your sort of news nights.
Mm.
And yeah, they needed an extra body, so I got to be that extra body. So that's a piece of work. I can't say I'm not I can't say I'm proud of it, because I didn't actually really do anything. I was there on the night mainly in case anything went wrong that I could help out. It didn't. It went very smoothly. And no matter what you think of the outcome of the politics side of it, from a logistical side, that went really, really well. And I got to be there. And
Mm.
I would have paid them to go along and do that, just to be there,
Historical,
be
yeah.
behind the scenes and
Mm.
see it happening, and sort of see the announcements. So that was fabulous. And you know, I'll note White Mackay as well used to be a client of mine back in the day. Obviously, Tom, that's where you are. So I thought I would just chuck in a little bit of brand placement for you there.
Thank you.
Uh,
Always
just
helps.
the I did some launch stuff around the Shackleton whiskey, which yeah, whiskey launch, not necessarily right up my street, but a very memorable um, whiskey tasting that was done over social media right in the very early days of social media. We sent out some journalists some whiskey in little vials, and then the inimitable Richard Patterson, the master blender at White Mackay, did a tasting for them over social media. So we had a scribe. I mean, it wasn't done on video or anything. It was all done the written word, but he needed a volunteer to actually do the tasting on, and I was the only other person in the room, so that ended up being me. So I had a one-to-one tasting of the Shackleton whiskey with Richard Patterson, which was definitely a very memorable moment. And then and then I have to say, just about everything that we've done at Clark, I mean, it has a much more personal feel for me about it, obviously, because Clark was my own business, and is now the business that I part own with Angela, who I can see is on the call. So Angela and I are now partners in the business, and every piece of work that we do feels important and interesting and memorable. In some way, we have some fantastic clients, and the team are doing amazing work, and it never fails to excite me on a day-to-day basis when I see what everybody's doing. I'm not doing the client work really anymore, so I sit back and watch it, and now I just get to do admin and counting things.
So let's fast forward to that point. Tell me a bit about starting up on your own initially. What were kind of early challenges, early learnings, any kind of landmark moments in those early years where you like this is all worthwhile. This is we can grow this, we can make this something.
Yeah, yeah. It's a frightening thing to do. You
Mm.
you you push that email out into the world on 5th of April 2012, saying I've gone out on my own, and I'm doing work on my own. We're comms people. We're built to promote other people, not so much ourselves. And I think an imposter syndrome is a very real thing. You almost feel a little bit about apologetic about pushing yourself out into the world. And I did that on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and at 9:15, the phone rang. And um, did you hear that? The phone rang.
Phone.
Oh, what's that like? The phone rang at 9:15, and it was somebody who I had kind of courted for business development when I was at Weber, but they had never, they'd never quite got over the line. And they phoned and said, yeah, we'll work with you. And so, within that sort of on that first morning, I sort of signed up my first client, and and we took it from there. I would say one of the big things that I learned is not to undervalue yourself. As I was so grateful that somebody wanted to work with me that I think I charged them like tuppence halfpenny. And then, they stayed a client for quite a long time. And I thought, oh God, how am I going to get out of this one now? No wonder they stayed a client for a long time. I was hardly charging them. But, so I think that, and that's certainly something when I speak to people who are thinking of setting up, on their own, it's don't undervalue yourself. Your talent or your worth is not that much different than it was when you were in an agency. It might be your fees or whatever might have to be a little bit less because you're not necessarily surrounded by all the support that you had or necessarily all the systems and tech that you had. But what's up here hasn't changed. So don't underestimate the value of that. And the other one obviously is get really good advisors and have really good accountants and everything round about you because they're very helpful. But also they allow you to just get on with the work and think about the comms side of things, think about the strategic stuff that you need to do for clients, think about developing the business, and somebody else can, to an extent, take care of some of that stuff. So yeah, they're the kind of main things. And I went along like that for a couple of years before starting to then hire, and then hiring people into a small agency to come and work with you is difficult because people want career progression and people want to, they want to know that there's a structure and how they fit into that. So to scale up a little bit further and a bit of a jump, I acquired Golly Slater, who was a sort of established agency at the time, and that gave us a little bit of scale overnight. And then it was more organic growth, COVID, all of those milestones, and then last year we did another acquisition, which wasn't about acquiring bulk or people, although that was part of it. It was really about sort of being able to broaden some of the areas that we could work in and sort of look at some slightly different sectors, which still really fitted with us as an agency, but allowed us to really broaden our horizons.
If anyone has any questions, do please drop them in, and we'll get to those shortly. As you were setting up, is there any pieces of advice you would give to yourself from when you were setting up your own thing? Any kind of pitfalls you think that would be a good bit of advice to pass on to people to avoid as you're feeling your way into these things?
Um, Apart from the don't undervalue yourself, and obviously that's very much a piece of, well, it's a piece of financial advice, but also not. There's undervaluing yourself in the very literal sense, and there's undervaluing yourself in other ways. The whole imposter syndrome thing, but also it's a being a kind of senior person in any business. There is pressure that comes with that. And as an owner or a shareholder, that pressure is just slightly different. And what I would say is maybe what I would have said is slow down a little bit sometimes in the decision making. Because we're a client business, and we're very adept at supporting our clients, but running a business is a completely different skill. And I would say there are probably some times over my career where let's make those decisions so I can get back to this stuff.
Mm.
And I probably made some decisions too quickly, um, or out of desperation. And particularly hiring decisions, sometimes it's oh, we really need somebody, and we need somebody now, and maybe I didn't make the right decision sometimes, which yeah is not great for the business. It's also not great for that individual either. I feel really strongly that hiring decisions are some of the most important decisions you make, both for your business, but because there's a person involved and they have a family, and if you make a bad decision in that situation, the impact on that goes far broader than your business. And I think you owe it to everybody to really make the right decisions when you're recruiting and you're bringing people into your team.
So, couple more for me, and then we'll
Okay.
go to the audience. Um, uh, any, if you were, what piece of advice would you give to people wanting to get in, young people especially wanting to get into the industry in 2026? What piece of advice would you give?
In terms of how they should go about it practically, or just maybe when they get into the industry early, early doors, how they should approach that.
Either. I think there's parallels with what you said about the time that you got started and challenging times economically. There's parallels with that
Yeah,
on
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of where we are now.
yeah,
But any kind of pieces of advice that you would have for people that are like that don't know where to get started. We're more
yeah.
connected
Okay.
than ever. Maybe you don't need to pick up the phone, but if somebody came to you and was like, "I want to work in your agency in 3 or 4 years' time," how would I go about
I tell you how not to go about.
that? That's good. That's good advice.
Don't send a letter kind of that says, that, oh, Clark's the most brilliant agency, and I've respected you for many years, and basically, sorry, I might swear a little bit, but yeah, don't send letters to people blowing smoke up their arse. And then, we know that's not sincere. We know you've never heard of us, so it's, I think, yeah, it's about authenticity. And I, when you've been in this industry for 20 years, 30 years, you know a letter that's been sent out to, dozens of people. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if the same compliment is paid to 20 or 30 people, we know what that looks like. So, maybe try not to do that. But I think honesty, authenticity, a recognition of the fact that you don't have experience and need to learn. But that, what are the skills that you have that put you in a good place to do that? um, a willingness to learn. When you get letters, and we get them all the time, they're sort of unsolicited emails, and sometimes we do pick up on them. But that sort of, I'm amazing. I know what I'm doing. I'm a rounded professional, and I'm going to be a massive benefit to your agency. I, no. I'm somebody who's willing to learn. I'm good at learning. At some point in the future, I could be a massive benefit to your agency, but an appreciation that to start off with, I need to learn, and I'm really good at that, and I'm really interested in doing that, and I want to ask all the questions and learn all the stuff, and I know you've got a good reputation, those sorts of things. I think just a bit of honesty, kind of integrity and authenticity right at the beginning is probably a good thing. I mean, we don't do those things anymore, in terms of I worked for 9 months and didn't get paid for it.
Mm.
The industry has moved on a lot since then. The ethics of the industry has moved on a lot since then, and we would never expect people to do that now. And unpaid internships are few and far between. But if you can through college or uni, do some sort of internship, then I think an agency is a really good place to do it, because you get to chop into lots of different things and you get to see lots of different things happening. So try and get a bit of experience that way.
So some questions from what is it? What is it that motivates you day to day? What is it that drives you? You've done every job in the agency world. You're heading up your own agency now. What is it that like what is it that's what's next?
I still get a massive buzz from something that we've devised or something that we've done being successful. Still get a huge buzz out of that. I mean, when you boil down PR, and I know PR is so many things, and we have graphic design in the business, and we have social in the business, and uh, you know there's still that buzz from seeing a client in print. And when I say in print or on screen, or on broadcast or whatever, there's still a massive buzz from that, because there's work gone into that, there's thought gone into that, there's strategy gone into that, and a lot of the time that still drives me. Just smart ideas, and sort of hearing different approaches that that I still get excited about. There's quite a few in my team on here. They probably have a chuckle, but yeah, I do get overexcited about some things, that and they tend to be just really smart, but quite often really simple ideas. And yeah, I get really kind of enthusiastic about that sort of thing. But then what motivates me on a daily basis, I the responsibility of running an agency that employs a number of people. There's nothing like the motivation of 20 mortgages
Mm.
to get you out of bed, and I'm not complaining about that. I started that, I built that. Angela and I now sit with that, and that's what we kind of think about when we get up in the morning. But also, it's not just your team members that put their trust in you, but your clients, they have put their trust in you as well. They're giving you their budgets, and particularly when times are a little bit challenging, they're trusting you to do the right thing with those as well. That's some pretty big motivation there, I would say, to get up and do the right thing. And I picked the right career. So I still enjoy it. Everyone has a bad day, but by and large, I wake up in the morning and enjoy what I'm doing. And I go on holiday for a week or a couple of weeks, and I miss it while I'm away, and I look forward to coming back and seeing my team or seeing clients, and hearing about what's going on. And when that stops happening, then just shut me in a cupboard and give me a book, and I'll shuffle off and just go back to reading books. But it hasn't happened yet.
So it's probably just time for a couple more that we've got.
Sorry, yeah.
No, no,
I
not
told
at
you I was
all.
a rambler.
No, it's golden. It's great stuff. How do you see the Scottish PR agency landscape changing in the coming years? And obviously, I mean, I always feel like so much change in the last few years. Other things are kind of the same, just different ways of doing them. But like the bit of future forecasting, how do you see the agency landscape changing in
Right,
the coming
Ursula,
years?
thanks for that question.
It's just a little one, the
Yeah.
future proof.
I mean, the change, and as it so often is in our sector, the change will come from other things that are happening outside our sector. So, obviously, some of the big changes that have happened over the last few years were, there have been about technology, they've been about the sort of changing face of the media. When I came into PR, it was all about getting your clients in newspapers. That changed. The specialist desks started to disappear, and that changed the way that we did things. Email, uh, email came. Yes, I have been doing it that long. That sort of came around then. That completely changed things. So we do tend to be sort of kicked about a bit by everything that happens out with the sector. And I would like to think we maybe try and grasp a little bit more and take a little bit more control of how we change. Now, obviously, AI is the key thing, and that will be another change. um, it will change. It will change the way that we do things. Obviously, I don't think it's a replacement. I don't think it signals that the death knell for agency or anything like that. But it will certainly change the way that we do things. We're already seeing that the things that we have to offer clients are very much more in that relationship, sort of building collaboration, building relationships sort of side of things. The human side of what we do um, is becoming a lot stronger. And we're not press release factories. We're not just kind of, spitting out press releases and photographs, which, hey, 25 years ago, that was the majority of what we did. We did press releases and we sent them out to people. And AI is, to an extent picking up some of that, not not from end to end. I would say it's so far it's a great tool for research. It's a great first draft. It's certainly not replacing the more strategic and thinking side of and relationship side of what we do. So there will be change. Um, there's over. I actually Googled it earlier on. Did I Google it or did I ask ChatGPT? I think I asked ChatGPT, and I know you're not supposed to do that, and I know it's not Google. But it was in part of a larger conversation I was having with ChatGPT, shall we say, just about the kind of PR sector and the PR scene and the creative the creative agency scene. There are over 600 creative agencies in Scotland, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops. A lot of those are lone wolves, and I think as they band together, sort of safety in numbers, but more security. I think we'll probably see a real change there in the sector, but yeah, it could go completely the opposite way, and I could be completely wrong.
It's an impossible question that was very well
It is.
answered.
It
Um,
is.
but so final one. Is there anybody that you learn from now? Is there anybody who you're kind of where you are in your career that you're still learning from them? Who are those people? There's
Oh,
somebody.
absolutely. Every single day,
Yeah.
and I would say every member of my team. As I say, they're the guys that are doing the kind of frontline work now, and that frontline work is changing. So I learn from them on a daily basis.
Mm.
Um, I always sort of say to people, sometimes clients come along and they go, well, no, but I want you to be doing the work because you're the most senior person in the business, or that well, my account team should obviously be you and Angela because you guys are the people that run the business. No, that's not what you want. You want the people who are at the coalface doing the work on a day-to-day basis, because they're the ones with the contacts. They're the ones who are more familiar with how it's kind of working on a day-to-day basis now. So yeah, I learn from them every day, and being open to that learning is I think is so important to to keep until until the day you turn your toes up, I guess.
That feels like a poignant point to finish on. Thank
Wow,
you.
beginning right to end.
Thank you.
We got
Thank you.
there, didn't
We've
we?
gone properly beginning to end here. Thank you so much for your thoughts, for your insights, for your answers. I think this was incredibly useful and yeah,
Thanks.
great to hear you. So, thank you very much, Lesley. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you for your questions, and yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you soon on another edition of these Secrets of Our Success. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Bye.